Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. The 2024 general election is well over a year away, but already pundits are making bold predictions about who might appear on the ticket in North Carolina. There's particular focus on the GOP primaries coming up in March, where some controversial candidates are emerging as frontrunners. WRAL state government reporter Paul Specht has been keeping a close eye on those races, and he joins us now. Paul, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
You recently reported that if a trio of Republican frontrunners win their primaries, North Carolina could have one of the most socially conservative tickets in years.
That's right. You know, at the presidential primary for the Republicans, we all expect Donald Trump to emerge from that. He's leading in the polls now, despite being indicted, I think, 3 times at this point. Then in the race for governor next year, there's Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, who's considered the front runner. He's had his own mishaps, some might say, just in the way he's phrased his criticisms of the LGBTQ community and even women. People say that he's made himself really vulnerable to attacks from the left that could really make a difference in swing districts in North Carolina and suburban areas, I should say. And now enters Dan Bishop, and he's instantly the front runner in the Attorney General's race, at least on the Republican side, because he's a known figure. He's been in Congress since 2019, and before that, he was a state legislator for 5 years.
Now, a lot has to happen before November 2024. Obviously, we've got those primary elections. What are the odds that all these candidates win their primaries?
Right now, I'd bet on all of them. I'd bet on all of them because of the name recognition and because of support from the party. When we went to the North Carolina Republican Party convention earlier this year, Donald Trump drew more people than Ron DeSantis. And of course, that's anecdotal, and it doesn't mean all that much, and there's lots of time until we get to March of next year when the primary actually happens. But there was a noticeable difference between support for Trump and support for the other speakers, who also included former Vice President Mike Pence, by the way. And then with Mark Robinson, it was the same way. He's sort of the darling of the North Carolina Republican Party right now because he emerged from nowhere. He speaks powerfully, and he comes from a different background than a lot of the Republican politicians do. And I say that because he's an African-American man, and he would be, I believe, the first black governor in North Carolina's history. At least he has that opportunity to be. And now Bishop, he has a long record, but he also comes to the table with support from a huge Washington Political Action Committee. That's Club for Growth. They're very influential. They have lots of money to throw around, just as they did in 2022 when they helped Ted Budd win his Republican primary race for U.S. Senate.
Well, what's happening on the other side of this ticket? Democrats look at this GOP lineup and say what? Well,
they say that it looks like an angry ticket. They say it looks like 3 potential candidates in Trump, Mark Robinson, and Dan Bishop, who all have social grievances. And they think that will turn off, like I said, those key voters in suburban areas who might swing either way, depending on the election, depending on what the issues are and where the momentum is going. At this point, we expect, obviously, President Biden to be the Democrats' choice in that race. Josh Stein is currently the front runner for governor. He's the attorney general now. He's running for governor on the Democratic ticket. And then we'll just have to wait and see who emerges in the attorney general race, because right now there's not a big name. And so we could see someone like Congressman Jeff Jackson jump in. He was an attorney. He's currently representing a congressional district near Charlotte. We expect state legislators to redraw the map, and his district might get reshaped, or just he might get drawn out altogether. So we have to wait and see. But a lot of people expect him to jump in if his options are limited in the next couple months, I should say.
And that's because Republican lawmakers draw those maps and are expected to draw them in a way that favors them, correct?
Right. That's what I mean.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear about what these candidates tell us about today's Republican Party. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Paul Specht about the 2024 elections. Paul, that possible GOP slate in 2024, Trump, Robinson, Bishop, what does that tell us about the Republican Party of today?
Right. Earlier, I mentioned the quote that a Democratic strategist gave me that they would be the angriest ticket. Another way it was put by Michael Bitzer, a political expert down at Catawba College, was they're combative. They represent a segment of the Republican base that wants to fight. They want to fight about the elections. They want to fight about abortions, and they want to fight even about social issues. They're big social conservatives, and they're not going to try to hide it. In this past U.S. Senate race, Ted Budd's campaign spokesman told us, hey, at the time, abortion was a huge issue. He sort of kept his head down and avoided the spotlight, even skipped debates in the Republican primary, and that worked for him. He took that strategy and went to Washington with it. These three, they don't do that. They will show up to the microphone. They will open their mouths. They will defend these positions, even if they're controversial. And experts say that's what the base wants. They represent sort of the changing desires of Republican voters.
I want to talk about the most recent entry, and that's Bishop. He announced his entry into the AG race on Friday. After serving in Congress, why would he want to run for a statewide position?
Right. It might seem like a step down to some people. He would argue that it's not. He would argue that, in Congress you're one of over, I think it's 400 representatives. He did work his way up through the House Freedom Caucus, so he sort of has that feather in his cap. But he would say he has more power as a state attorney general than he does as a congressman. A lot of attorneys general have used the office to challenge and push back at new policies and new laws enacted by the federal government. So you can sort of be on the front lines of that fight between, states' rights and federal government's rights. And that's how he sees it. He could be sort of the face of the fight from the Republican standpoint in North Carolina.
And his experience both on the federal side and on the state side give him that vantage point, right?
Right. You'll hear him say that a lot. He'll say, I've been to Washington and this is how it works. I've worked in Raleigh as a state legislature and here's how things work down there. He'll absolutely use that to his advantage.
Now, Bishop has a pretty controversial background in the state, as you've reported. How could that affect his campaign?
Right. Well, it's certainly going to give the Democratic Party some ammunition, and here's why. He was the architect of the so-called bathroom bill, or HB2, that passed in 2016. Now, that was really controversial at the time. Businesses and sports leagues denounced it, protested it, saying it's really discriminatory towards transgender people. Some of them canceled their plans to expand business here. They canceled events here, and so on. And ultimately, former Governor Pat McCrory lost his election bid in part because of that. That's one reason that Roy Cooper, Democrat, got into office. The Democrats retook the governor's mansion. So, knowing that history, Democrats know that in the past they have used that as a wedge issue, and it's worked. At least it did in 2016. And so you can expect for Bishop's involvement with HB2 to show up on the campaign trail and in attack ads. From the Republican side, what they'll say is, hey, Bishop was ahead of his time. He has not backed down from his work on that bill, and he'll defend it, saying, hey, this was a big issue at the time, and it's a big issue now. And if you look around the country, there are multiple states that have passed laws restricting what transgender people can and can't do. Of course, from the Republican perspective, it's protecting the rights of women and girls and children. That's what they'll say. But that's sort of what you'll see on the campaign trail is Bishop as the architect of this really controversial bill, or Bishop ahead of his time, someone who's been in touch with the Republican base for a while now.
So with all that said, what kind of shot does he, or any Republican for that matter, have at actually winning the AG seat?
Republicans say he is their first serious candidate that can win in perhaps decades. A Republican has not held this seat since the 70s. That Republican, I believe, was appointed. A Republican hasn't been elected in over 100 years. Well, and in the last election, we should point out, Jim O'Neill was the Republican candidate. He is a district attorney from Forsyth County. He came within 1 percentage point of beating Josh Stein, but he was outraised by hundreds of thousands, if not, millions in that race. And so Bishop comes in and says, I've got more name recognition than O'Neill did. I have been around longer, and I'm coming to the table with this Washington think tank who's going to back me up. In his mind, and in the minds of a lot of Republicans, that's more than enough to overcome that 1 percentage point gap that we saw in the last AG's election.
Is there a longer-term focus for Bishop if he wins the AG race?
Well, yes. That's because in North Carolina, the Attorney General's office has been long seen as a launch pad for people who want to run for governor. Obviously, Roy Cooper was Attorney General for a long time before he won in 2016. Now, Josh Stein is attempting to do the same thing. Some people might consider him the front runner in that race. And regardless of what happens, Bishop would, some would speculate, probably attempt to do the same thing if he becomes Attorney General and builds a track record there, and obviously a statewide network of supporters that can get out the vote. He would be a very serious candidate to run for governor someday.
Well, I know that's all a long way out, and I know that you'll be keeping us up to speed as we get closer to Election Day. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
That's WRAL state government reporter Paul Specht. For the latest political coverage from Paul and the rest of our NC Capital team, visit nccapital.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.